Digital people, okay.
You're going to have to put that mic down. Okay, welcome everyone to this lecture that beautifully overlaps our housing studio development and also an alumni event in a way and an afternoon before reading week. And so, yeah, I want to take this opportunity. My name is Cheryl Boyle. I'm a faculty member teaching in the school in 4th year, so most of you are 4th year here, but people outside the school. And introduce my classmate, actually. Stephen Kovacs is a 1990 alumnus of the School of Architecture here, and after which he spent a decade in post-unification Germany working on numerous internationally oriented study and cultural programs addressing architecture, urbanism, and digital media activism. He is founding co-director of the Rogue Agency for Open Culture and Critical Transformation, a Berlin-based non-profit organization applying open source technologies in post-conflict and rapid transformation regions, and lectures on media aesthetic education practices at the University of Darmstadt International Media Cultures Program. Previously artistic director of the Transmedial Festival for Art and Digital Culture in Berlin, Dutch Electronic Art Festival in Rotterdam, and the Oost-Rhine Electronic Media Forum, Bauhaus at Dessau. His current work with Rogue involves peace building, youth innovation, and digital media development. His initiatives such as the Defy Hate Now, that's a hashtag countering online incitement to violence, and the hashtag AskNet, Access to Skills and Knowledge Network, look to link critical making and digital culture as a means to empower marginalized communities. At Carleton University today, Steve will be introducing hashtag ROShop, or ROShop, I guess, ROSHOP, oh, ROSHOP, no shopping. The responsive open source housing prototype, a project by the South Sudanese refugee-led Youth Empowerment Foundation on upscaling local building skills and practice in the Paringa refugee settlement in northern Uganda. So I would also say that the project was the only project from Africa in the 2021 Media Architectural Biennale. So thanks so much for coming, Steve. If we could offer a round of applause. Welcome back to Carleton.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And also big thank you to Ben and to Steve and Kaspar, as well as to Federica Goffi for the invitation. I mean, you thankfully gave already, a good part of my of my talk. It is a genuine honor to be back here. So, for those of you who are studying here and you've already had a few years in here, I think you know what this space represents. And if you come back here in 30 years from now, it still has this power. And I must say, I am a little apprehensive, even a little bit nervous in here. I spent 5 years getting attacked in here for some pretty crazy ideas. And if there was one thing that I learned from being here at Carleton, was that the craziest of ideas are the best ones you got to run with. If you really believe in what you're doing, then you got to do it. And that's one thing that the school really taught me. And I think a lot of us who graduated from here were off doing all different kinds of careers in different places. I ended up working a lot in, well, as the introduction noted, in digital cultures. At a time when digital culture was actually very new, I was really interested in the design of social space. So I didn't build very many buildings, but I designed places for people to get together to exchange on ideas. I spent 10 years in Eastern Germany directly after I graduated, right when Germany was unifying. I was teaching there at this place, which is now the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation, so you might know that building. And a lot of the work that I do now is also linked to the kinds of massive political and social transformations that were going on in Eastern and Central Europe in the 1990s. So after that, just to give a quick little background before we dive into the slides, I ended up working also on some programs, some projects in Africa. I helped between 2000 and 2002 on the new urban master plan for the city of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And that was a very interesting project to be in that kind of scenario, trying to imagine sort of like a new city in the crazy big metropolis of Addis Ababa, and also learning about the beauties and the challenges also of Africa. And for example, how the so-called development industry doesn't really work very well. So these things, stuck with me. I was living in Rotterdam after that. I was living then, moved to Berlin, and about 10 years ago, together with my partner, Suzanne Bellinghausen, we founded this organization called the Rogue Agency for Open Culture and Critical Transformation. And it's really about those two notions, open culture and critical transformation. We ended up working at the very beginning with this kind of project company idea in the state of South Sudan. So South Sudan became a new independent country in July 2011, and we started this work there in 2012. And we were basically working with young innovators, young people who were learning how to make videos, how to develop media, how to learn ICT, but also wanting to sort of spread this knowledge in their communities in places that weren't really functional. So either the government wasn't functional, or infrastructure wasn't functional, or these kinds of things. So our work was very much about trying to find ways to, for example, get at information in places where you can't get at information. At the end of 2013, South Sudan broke into a civil war, and we thought, oh, all right, what do we do now? Do we get out, or do we continue? So we decided to continue. It made some extremely difficult choices and things for us, but basically all that work, what I'm going to show you today, is couched in that kind of thing. So I'm going to introduce also during the talk two of my colleagues who helped make this project. One is Peter Treuheit, who also graduated from here, from Carleton. He's 3 hours behind us in Sechelt, British Columbia. And Vuga William, who is the head of the Youth Empowerment Foundation, who's basically ran the project for this building. He's 7 hours ahead of us in Uganda. And I'm going to ask you, or one of you guys, to give me a little bit of a time thing, right? Because I think we started a little bit late, and I want to make sure that I don't talk too much. So, okay, anyhow, we'll dive into the slides. They may be a little bit chaotic because they're trying to get a lot of different things together. But yeah, this is the introductory slide. It's actually from this Media Architecture Biennale that Cheryl mentioned at the beginning, where this kind of somewhat crazy house project, which we called the Responsive Open Source Modular Housing Prototype in the Pagarinya satellite. Pagarinya is a refugee settlement in northern Uganda, was made, and yeah, it was the only media architecture project there. And why it's a media architecture project, I will explain as we go along. But yeah, so yeah, unfortunately, because of the zoominess and all this, some things are blocked off, but this is just a little blurb about, again, who we are and what we do. I basically explained, most of that, but just a little bit of contextualizing images of sort of who we work with, where we work with, our mission, as I mentioned, enabling access to information to support the development of free and open societies. So we do a lot of peace-building work through technology, and we're very much concerned about using open source and open technologies in order to share knowledge and use that as motors to help empower marginalized communities. Yeah, we have one major program that started back in those first days in 2012, 10 years ago, which is the AskNet, Access to Skills and Knowledge Network. Basically, it's now a network of a bunch of community-based hubs, small media organizations run by young people. 3 of them are in South Sudan. 3 of them are in Uganda. The slide says 5, but in the meantime, we have 6 such hubs. The ones in Uganda are run by South Sudanese refugees in Uganda, in the refugee settlements. And the one I'm going to be talking about today is this one down in the bottom corner there, Yef, in Adjumani. So Adjumani is a small town in Uganda, and Adjumani has 19 refugee settlements sprinkled around it. And the people from Yef work primarily in one of them, which is called Pagarinya. And I think there's around 95,000 people, something like that, who live there. Don't quote me totally on the number, because some of these settlements are very big, some are smaller, but it's kind of in that range. Through these projects, we develop open educational resources. So we run workshops with people locally on various subjects related to access to information and technology. And usually we try to have a little bit of a product come out of these things. And one of these products that we've had are these so-called open guides or open learning guides. And these are actually posters that one can use in an offline environment. So we have this issue of how to look at learning about what technology is and what the internet is, all that, if you're often actually offline. So we develop offline mechanisms like these posters to do that. So for example, the Open Hardware Guide shows like how to create methodologies to build your own stuff. How do you source materials in places where it's difficult? The Open Training Guide is actually just very simple. It's like, how do I run a workshop if I want to run a workshop? Yeah, a little bit like the young woman who was here saying this is how to do a crit, right? Or how to deal with crits. I thought that was really nice. You know, you could have a little guide for that as well. So in our peace building work, we have this program called Defy Hate Now. This was a reaction to the war in South Sudan, where we saw how social media influencers were actually pushing this war. A lot of these people were actually Canadians, like South Sudanese Canadians. So we have a whole program on methodologies on how to counteract or how to counter online incitement to violence, for example. And this started in South Sudan with different kinds of trainings and campaigns and so on. It's now running in Cameroon in the so-called Anglophone conflict there. So there's a war in Cameroon in this Anglophone part of the country. And we also have a program similar to this in Ethiopia, which is extremely challenging right now. So within this peace-building work of social media, online incitement to violence, we run these campaigns like Think Before You Click, so dealing with these kinds of straightforward concepts. And I must say that when we started this in 2014, people didn't talk about the relationship between social media and violence. So when we talked to people and tried to get funding for this kind of stuff, they said we were out to lunch. Like, there's no such thing as incitement to violence online. But of course, now we know it, and it's everywhere, it's prevalent. So kind of this work has kind of sort of even caught up to us here and where I live in Germany. Defy Hate Now, yeah, as I mentioned, it takes place in these locations. We're having a global network starting now as well. But essentially, we always focus on this issue of open technologies and how to make stuff, how to learn about basic electronics, how to learn about what is solar energy, what is a solar lamp, can I build one, can I fix one? And so repair culture is everywhere in our work because for example, in these refugee settlements, the UN comes along and distributes cheap solar lamps made in China that work for a couple days, and then they don't work. And then people just throw them out. So they're kind of like littered all around. And usually the only problem is like there's a little wire that's come undone. So I've got to admit blend here. Okay. So how to repair things, how to set up like a community repair cafe is really important element of this kind of also sort of peer-to-peer work that we do. So these are just some of those elements of that thing. This Solar Mini, for example, is a DIY 5-volt mobile phone charger. We use that as a vehicle in trainings to teach people about electricity, about power, about solar, about chemistry, about physics, about mathematics. You can wrap all those things into the building of such a device, for example. Again, a look at these posters which I mentioned earlier. The one in the middle, this social media and migration field guide. We have a series of these things that are field guides, which are about how to run workshops on countering online incitement to violence. In this case, it's relating to irregular migration from Ghana to Europe. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Okay, yeah, so a quick note about how some of this stuff is done. So we do a lot of our work using this collaborative platform called GitHub. I'm assuming that some of you might know what GitHub is. I mean, is there anybody here who's a GitHub user? What, got one down here, okay. I got another one over there, okay, so not so many. So, well, there's Git. Git is a thing that was developed by the guy who invented the Linux operating system, Linus Torvalds. And it was basically just a very simple way on how a lot of people can get together and collaborate online to develop code. So all of Linux, for example, was developed through this Git system. Git doesn't really mean anything. It's just a name that the guy made up. It kind of, served for like a boorish English gentleman or something like that. And out of Git is this software and this company that is now owned by Microsoft called GitHub. And GitHub is this place where you can collaborate. It's originally meant for collaborating on developing software, but you can use it for anything. So you can have complex projects that you document, you create methodologies, and then you can export that, for example, as a website or as a blog, whatever. So we use GitHub and we train on how to use GitHub in order to develop methodologies. So a lot of the things that we deal with, you have to have a certain how-to, a certain methodology. Otherwise, you're in the situation where each time you want to run a training, you start from scratch. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. But it requires also some training on how to use GitHub. And once you get into it, beautiful things can happen. So we used GitHub in order to develop this building, which is the key of my talk here. This slide and the first slide, these are posters that were made for this Media Architecture Biennale, and the situation here was that, and I'm going to invite my colleague Vuga from Uganda in a minute to come on, was that these guys working in this refugee settlement, they don't have a place to work. Like, you go there and you're kind of maybe in a tent, you can't leave stuff anywhere, you can't lock anything up. And for years they've been asking, well, can't we build a building? Can't we build a building? I said, well, yeah, you can build a building, but we don't have money for that. So we get funding for the work that we do, but it's only about training and stuff like that. We're not allowed to spend money on building buildings, for example, or on infrastructure. So during COVID, when we were doing everything online, which is also extremely complicated when the people there have difficulties with electricity and all that, but it somehow works. We got this idea, why don't we develop a modular or a methodology on how to look at local building practices in a modular form, do a GitHub repository about it, but look at how these elements can be upscaled. So people there locally, they can build, they build small houses, tukuls and so on, but they can't build bigger structures. They don't have the experience for it. They have to wait till the UN comes along and builds some crappy building for them. So we developed this again, sort of kind of this crazy idea that would be okay for the funder of doing workshops about GitHub and how to develop these digital methodologies on local building practices. But of course, to practice, you got to practice. So the outcome of this digital repository building making was a real building. And for that, we had a whole group of people together. Everybody was online. These included Peter Treuheit, who will also come on in a minute to talk a bit about that. He was like our design and architecture advisor for it. Peter lived many, many years in Africa. He knows the context very well and has a very interesting eye to these things. We worked with a group of people here at Carleton with Steve Fye's PhD class. They were helping with some of the mentoring on GitHub and stuff like that. So it was a really, really interesting but very complex collaboration where, of course, we have this issue of the many, many time zones. Like between Uganda and West Coast BC, you've got like, I don't know, 11 hours difference. So maybe just at this point, I'd like to bring in Vuga just to introduce himself and the Pagarinya refugee settlement. And I just got to figure out how we're going to do that. Can you bring Vuga in on screen? A guy called Vuga William, or do I have to do that here? You have to stop the screen sharing. Okay, stop share. This is where things are getting tricky. All right. And there's Vuga. Okay, and yeah. So Vuga, can you just start talking, and then we will put you here, I guess. Yeah, his camera is on, but I want.
Hello, everyone.
There he is. Okay. So this is Vuga William. He's in the town of Adjumani right now. He's the head of this Youth Empowerment Foundation. And Vuga, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Vuga William. My refugees. This is my second time to be in a refugee settlement in Uganda. I grew up in one of the refugee settlements years back in Ogujebe. Later on, and in 2013, I had a chance to be back in a country where, again, there's a conflict. What I did was I have to also fled back in Adjumani district where I settled in Pagarinya refugee settlement. Pagarinya is where a home for refugees. More than 19,000 refugees settled, and most of the population was hit by young people who are unskilled, and there's no space actually for young people that can gather together and share idea. So we sit down with a group, so we thought how we are going to help each other, and then we found YEF, which stands for Youth Empowerment Foundation. It's a community-based youth-led media organization founded at a Pagarinya refugee settlement in year 2017. So we support in peace building and gender integrated in innovation through media advocacy and mentorship, as well ICT skill training. So since we have activity under DeFi heads, we normally go block by block. Refugees was divided, Pagarinya 1 and Pagarinya 2 with the blocks. So we normally organize a series of training, and our biggest challenge is we don't have a space where we can share ideas, sit together, and learn. So we thought wisely and requested to Rock if we can build a house, but the project couldn't allow. Then we also gathered ourselves to learn how GitHubs and we can share the knowledge. So through with Peter, so we normally get tutorials and online collaborations, then mentorship. So with local engineer in the community, we have come with an ideas and young people. So we started building the house and using local material in the settlements. And the good thing is that young people are hungry and they have that energy to learn new things. So it is composed with the host community. So we came together with a number of 20 to 15 young girls and young boys. So we set up, and that's how we have come up with the building. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Vuga. And you're going to stay on the call so that if people have questions or whatever, you can also take them and all that. But super cool that you could join us. I know it's late at night already over there at your end of the planet, and I appreciate that you can also use your data to be on with us.
All right.
Okay, now I got to go back to the slide share. Okay, that's over here. Hang on. Yep. Dumps. All right, well, it worked. Excellent. Okay, now let's see, how do I get the slides to actually advance? Okay, so these are the other like posters from this, from the Media Architecture Biennale, which was actually in Amsterdam, but it was online because of COVID. This one has to understand, like this was extremely radical for these young people in Pagarinia, not only to build their own building, but to participate in this kind of international biennale. And it was extremely radical also for the people at the biennale to host a project that looks like sort of like a very DIY building thing, and get the whole connection between the sort of the digital nature of it. So, and it is sometimes a little bit difficult to explain, but I think they obviously got it. This is a screenshot of one of the young people who was working on the repository, so on the digital methodology part of it, which of course was also a training thing. So there was basically one team building the stuff, the other team who was doing the documentation and developing the methodology. And all of this is actually not really done yet, so the next phase will be to actually like fix this, clean it up, make it real. The whole process took about 3 to 4 months, which was kind of shockingly short, but it somehow worked. And here in this next poster from the Biennale, we see a photograph and a sketch from Peter. So these things were being all done, bit by bit, obviously, a lot of back and forth. But when you're doing this kind of thing completely online, you're kind of in the dark most of the time, right? You don't really know exactly what's going on where. Yeah, and you have to rely, of course, on the little bits and pieces of information that you get. So here in the photograph, there's some of the construction that's already been happening. And Peter was like sketching in, well, this is sort of like how we're thinking like the roof area might work. And then you'll see later on, we sort of got into some issues here on the roof element. But the building, as you'll see other pictures of it, it has two main areas, two main shapes. There's a cylindrical piece and a sort of a pavilion piece, which is kind of a cube. And this cylindrical piece was built a little bit like a traditional tukul, just bigger. And this is a view into the roof, into the ceiling of that. And this is the context. So this is actually what Pagarinia looks like. Okay, these are all refugee-built structures. These refugee settlements look very different than what we know sometimes from the media as a refugee camp. So it's not a camp, it's a settlement. What happens is that the refugees that are coming across the border from South Sudan, of which there are about 1.2 million in Uganda and Kenya, they're given like a little plot of land in a specially marked off area. They're given maybe a shovel and a blanket and a little bit of tools and stuff, and say, okay, well, here you go. You can do whatever you want here. So what starts to happen is like they start rebuilding kind of like the village structures that they had where they came from. And these are these very typical tukul houses, just various types. They're usually round. They're usually made with brick, with sort of adobe on the outside. There's often, or every now and again, there's square ones, like up in that corner, you see a square-shaped hut. But most commonly, they are these round huts. And then these little cubey houses are very typical little things that are built for shops and stuff like that. So basically, kind of the structure of a village with shops and services also gets built up over time. You see the ubiquitous green stacking chair, those plastic stacking, they are everywhere on the planet. I don't know how that happens, but they're just there. And you'll note, for example, the kinds of foundations that these things sit on. So they all have a very, very specific and particular building construction methodology and technique. And the idea here was, well, how can we take those things and try to make them bigger? So you can build, for example, like a small school or a community center or a workshop space, whatever. Yeah. One of the really big problems with the tukuls is this type of construction is that there's virtually no air circulation in them, and there's no light in them, right? They're very closed little boxes. And so when we went into the idea of building a building, and we were in COVID, there was a couple of things, two central things that had to be done. Absolute natural lighting everywhere in the building, no electricity, and ventilation. So build a building that does not require electricity for anything in order to function. That is already kind of a bit of a challenge, I suppose. Yeah, anyways, this is another view of a sort of a more elegant tukul. People love to decorate them. They have pride in their places and where they live. And some of these tukuls are very, very beautiful objects and as houses. Now, I'm going to stop here and let Peter in before we get into this part. I'll just quickly explain the slide and let Peter get ready to come in. What you're seeing here is one of the big problems in building in that region is you got to build your own bricks too. And the only way to build bricks is to make a fire. And to make a fire, you got to cut down wood, got to cut down trees. There's hardly any trees there. So everything is being cut down to make fires, to burn bricks. So you've got an environmental problem because there's smoke and fire everywhere, and you've got no trees left. So one of the things we looked at, if we're going to build this thing, what are other technologies to build, for example, a wall? And we looked at rammed earth wall construction. That's what the other drawings here are about. Rammed earth is a wonderful thing if you got the right kind of soil for it, which they do. And that built the basis for the building that they were built. So it became an environmentally friendly building as well to avoid this issue of creating bricks. But again, for the people locally there, this is a whole new methodology and very exciting thing because they thought, wow, this is great. We don't have to wait for the bricks to kind of show up one day. So Peter Troyheit in Sechelt, British Columbia. I am going to once again stop my slide share and go to you. And I think you also have some slides to share with us. So on here, he's called Mobius. Can you turn your camera on and?
Yes, they are on.
There you are. All right. Excellent.
Yes.
So, Peter, welcome back to Carleton, back to the pit. Did you ever think that you'd be virtually here in this holy space?
No, I think similar to Steve, my last experience in 1989 was being down in that pit.
Maybe a touch louder? Sorry, just a tiny bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but you're a little bit muffled. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So yes, the last time I was in that pit presenting anything was 1989, so a few years ago. So I thought I would just give you a little 5 minutes. This is another one of, out of the blue, I get a call from Steve. Do you want to do this project in Africa? And so it always starts out that way, and starts out with a bunch of questions. So where are we talking about? So this is, can everyone see this?
Yep, it's good, it's good.
Okay, so Uganda is this area in red, almost in the middle of Central Africa. It's to the north is South Sudan, so that's where the refugees are all coming from. To the east is Kenya, to the west is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and then Rwanda to the south and Tanzania. So again, this was all started out with questions. So where are we talking about? And then who are we talking about? What are we talking about? Why are we doing this? And when are we doing this? So obviously with Steve, the when is right away. So it's been a very interesting process, being mostly online. This is the country of Uganda. You can see Pagarinya is right at the border of South Sudan, and that's where the settlement is. As Steve has showed you a few slides, it's basically a small settlement. It's not what we're used to seeing, tents and that kind of temporary structure. So it really is a little settlement already. The first part of trying to understand how we can build a prototype was to understand what materials are available. So as we were saying, bricks seems to be one of the major factors there. And the only way to make bricks is to basically take the clay, make a big pile, and burn a fire under them. So we started looking at different approaches. What do they have available? And can we think of other ways to produce buildings or construction? They do have some wood members, so that's another part. So rather than burn the wood, can we not use the wood in the structure? We looked at some inspiration from other architects. This is Francis Carey, who's done some pretty amazing work in that area. So I think that's always interesting to have a reference of what's happening in the country at that time. As Steve was saying, part of the program is about peace and restorative justice. So one of the ideas was to bring those ideas into the architectural portion of this, or to make sure that as we're putting this together, that we think about these issues during the construction. So restorative justice, there's some physical aspects to it and some social aspects to it. The circle is a very important factor in that. So again, starting with local materials, thinking about issues, as Steve was saying, air movement, sunlight, collecting rainwater, energy, solar panels, all of those are things that we've thought about in this. So again, going down to the basics of the 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water, those were all factors in sort of coming up with, if we're going to build a prototype and it's going to turn into something, what can we use as sort of a language of producing a small building? And that's where this developed. As Steve was saying, we were looking at doing something that was not requiring us to burn bricks or to create bricks. And even here in Canada, seeing how rammed earth is being used, I started to think of why is that not something that we can do? And there are other projects throughout Africa where rammed earth is being used. And so communicating that to Vuga and his team over in South Sudan was definitely something of a challenge. We spend lots of time on YouTube looking at things together. So it's a pretty amazing forum that you can get this going. As I said, the circle was something that's in the language that exists there. So the circle and the square were sort of these two basic elements that we used. Thinking about the process. So this was sort of how we developed the process of what could this building look like? How could it be expanded in the future? And really focusing on not the building on its own, but the process of the building and the prototype. So hoping that this would become the first of many, that the techniques that are being used here can be applied on many other projects. Obviously, if we were going to build something, it had to be something functional that could be used. And as Vuga was saying, they don't have a space to meet, to get together. So that was how this little plan was developed. We worked together with Vuga on creating some images of what this could look like, looking at different materials and uses. And here's just a couple of pictures of how construction happened there. So basically the laying out of the site, digging for the foundation, all of this by hand. So, thinking about local materials, local labor, local skills, what is available there. And I must say, Steve and I were pretty amazed by what Vuga and his team created there. Learning on their own, the excitement of doing this rammed earth together, creating their own formwork that they reused as they went up. So avoiding this whole situation, learning old techniques of roofing, thatch roofing, and really creating a beautiful structure in that environment. So that's just a little bit about the building and construction and the background on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. Stay in the call, of course. And thanks for your slides. You've saved me a little bit of trouble. Cool. And yeah, and again, thanks to you as well for all those insane early morning calls, 4 o'clock in the morning, that kind of stuff. And let's keep working on this.
Okay.
Let's go back. All right. So, yeah, Peter gave a pretty good rundown on sort of like how we got, moving on this whole idea. Now, how do I? Okay. Now, just sort of to give it some more context. So this building here, or semi-finished building, which is still sitting like this, is right next door to our YEF building, let's say. This is a typical building that the United Nations builds. All right. It's great being in the pit again. So this served as the model of everything that the YEF house should not be. Extremely expensive construction, all bricks, and get this, pressure-treated wood from Sweden. All right? So the UNHCR, I guess, has money for things like that, but no, they ran out of money halfway through. That's why the thing is sitting there like this. This building, of course, would need to be completely electrified. Every room would need a fan in it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this sort of became like the antithesis building right next door. And now the UNHCR has invited YEF to come to this building and say, look, we've got this thing halfway done. Can you guys make I don't know, think of some kind of workshop to train people on how to build stuff and then use this and just have fun with it, because this thing is not going anywhere. This is sort of the two different worlds in the same place that we are in, especially like when the UN has its Sustainable Development Goals, which you probably look at here at Carleton as well, right? This does everything except the Sustainable Development Goals, but they're nice guys, so. Yeah, as Peter said, we looked at various types of things. This idea of screens is important because the square part, the cubic part of the building, was meant to be more like kind of an open pavilion, and with screens kind of like as enclosure and entry. And yeah, we saw this from Peter's slides, material studies. Yeah, and so here we get some of those early sketches. The blue drums are there because the idea is that the rainwater, comes off the roof, collects in the drums, and then basically that. Here, I'm going to try this. Yeah, here we go. So that this is then this pavilion part, and then this one here is the more closed one, where you can actually lock things and store stuff in it and all that. And that was the basic thing. And again, the four main elements: modularity, made with simple elements that can be recombined; natural lighting, natural ventilation, and environmentally responsive. Now, of course, we can't forget the whole other team that was doing the digital documentation. So these were young people who had an interest in IT, but very little experience. So not that many people that we work with there actually have like a formal post-secondary education. Some people, most have had some high school, but it's very rare to be able to go on and learn in a formal way skills. So a lot of this stuff is learning by doing and by experience. And this guy here was one of the team who's like sitting there and trying to sort of like figure out, well, how do I get this kind of into a way that other people can understand it? This was really difficult because it requires, for example, good photography skills, and the pictures were not that great that we were getting. So we were setting up then also a workshop on how to take a picture of something so somebody else can actually understand what the thing is. Like not just a picture, but like a picture that actually carries an idea or a concept. That's not something that just kind of happens out of the blue. So that's also one of the things that we're looking at for collaboration with Carleton on. Photography techniques, for example, for architecture. Yeah, it's really important stuff. And on the right-hand side, you see just a screenshot from the development of this GitHub repository, which then, when it gets done properly, will show others how to build these things. And this guy said something very interesting after. He said, we who are doing the documentation and developing the methodology, we actually have to be 2 steps of all these other guys who are of all these other guys who are building the stuff. Like, we can't be running behind them. We have to be ahead of them. And this is conceptually very, very difficult to do because you have to kind of anticipate methodology before you do it. And in the whole building process, you're constantly in a trial and error kind of thing, right? It's not like here's a blueprint, you hire a contractor and you build it. You got to figure out how to build the stuff. So everything of this whole scenario is a learning process. And yeah, of course, the whole digital collaboration thing, various people around the globe. I think there's a couple down there that you might recognize. One of them sitting right here. Yeah, and this is where this wonderful notion of that there's no sleep in cyberspace really came true. But you've got that cyberspace digital realm, but you've got then also the people doing the real stuff on the ground. So a couple of shots just from that. Very, very important to have this sort of this civic interaction. So officials from the community would come over and check it out, like, what are you guys doing? Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? An engineer came by and said, we can't do this. I said, well, why not? Well, because we don't do things like this. Well, okay, so let's figure out how to do it, right? So there's really strong ingrained also mentalities that you know, this is the right way to build something. It's not the wrong way to do it, but we don't do that, so we don't do it. And you know, what we learn at Carleton is that you figure out a way to do it, right? And so the picture on the left-hand side of these guys welding these gates, this turned out to be, I don't know, I don't know if I call it a problem or an issue or whatever, but the screen idea turned really into heavy gates, because this is what they build, right? If you have a door, it's a very heavy metal door. If you got a window, it's got a very, very heavy grate. It's partly a security thing, or it's maybe almost knee-jerk reaction to required security. And yeah, so we never ended up really with the kind of screens. We ended up with these, I mean, very, very well done, but not really quite conceptually the way, you know, we thought it would be going. And so the building progressed, and the rammed earth wall part was done, which you can see here at the bottom. And then at the roof area, they start to brick it up. And it was like, whoa, what are they doing up there? We looked at sort of methodologies to put a roof on the thing, and that where those bricks are, that's kind of like where the light is supposed to come in. But okay, like what do you do, right? They're doing their thing, right? And so one day we got this photograph of the building that was kind of like almost done. Let's see, how does this work? This here, but without that blue stuff on there. And it was like completely just covered up, like bricked up. And we thought, oh my God, what happened, right? This is a disaster. And you know, we freaked out a little bit, like us online people, because this you know, kind of wasn't like the idea. And we had like a 24-hour like deep think. And so when I was in first year here, I had a professor called Meton Gadella. Some might remember Meton. He was really hardcore first year professor from Brazil. He would come to my desk up there, and he'd say, he always had his arms crossed like this. Kovacs, do again. And it's like, that's the most depressing thing, right? Just the day before you want to present your project, and your professor says, do it again. That's crap. Okay, well, I have to tell these guys, you got to do it again. Not that it's crap, but this is an experiment. This is a prototype. It's, you know, prototypes, you know, you can change them and stuff. So we had this discussion that it's like, well, you know, we got to take it off. We got to do it again because this is not going to work. It was a really bitter pill to swallow, but it led to a lot of really interesting discussions about why that's important, and also to think about, you know, like how you're building stuff or doing things in terms of this process to also, you know, show others. And of course, their problem was, well, the engineer came and said you have to do this, but they never thought of, you know, having a discussion or bringing in, you know, others, you know, to find these solutions. So these other sketches here are a little bit like, you know, what can we do to kind of save this situation? I mean, we don't want to tear the whole thing down. We don't have any money. But it was interesting because the notion of do again didn't turn into a tragedy for the team over there. Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. In the end, this is what the building looks like now. It looks amazing when you're there. Like when I only saw it in pictures, I was like, oh, well, You know, you get very attached to these things. When I went there, it blew my mind what they managed to do. Now, you know, the roof thing didn't get, you know, totally resolved. They punched out a big hole down there just to see what is the difference if you have a wall or you put this hole there. And it was like putting a huge lamp into the space. I mean, it just radically changed the whole character of the space. So, you know, they saw it. Again, you know, learning by doing. It's a tough way of learning by doing, but, you know, it really showed, you know, the way it should work. So this is how the house sits in its kind of site with this kind of weird gate thing. And the one punched out window, and they'll probably put another one there. This is open here, so the roof is open, and the round part sits, you know, halfway into that space. So it's actually reasonably close to the things that they were discussing with Peter, and you know, this is the physical manifestation of it. Now, there's a lot of really beautiful things in there too that, you know, were for us maybe a little bit unexpected. You know, they did go and look at their traditional way of building things like the foundations, and they built some, I mean, I just love these details. I mean, really, really beautiful ways of dealing with, you know, how the building sits. Again, they don't build stuff this big or this heavy or in this way, right? So even that is an experiment. And this beautiful red earth, you know, it's just, it's gorgeous. A detail of the rammed earth wall construction. Like, they were going to paint it. And I said, no, don't, please don't paint it. Because the point is, it's this thing, this object, this building is also a learning tool. So if you paint it, then people won't see how this rammed earth wall stuff works, right? So it's not just that it's a house for a house, but it's a workshop in building, in construction, in architecture, in design, in photography, all these things. That's the function, that's one of the functions of this building in that community. Also for the UN. The UN comes here and takes a look at how these guys built it. And they go, what? Who built this? And they said, well, we did. It's like, what? You guys built this? There's no way. It's never been done before. So that was cool. So this is some pictures of, you know, inside. Like this shot is in the main pavilion part, looking over at the round part. I don't know where this little thingy is. This is inside the round part, which is sort of the more closed area. Yeah, well, that's me and one of my friends there, and you see sort of this opening there. Like, they were a bit concerned, well, it's open there. Let's say, yeah, but it doesn't matter. Like, what, you know, that's just more air. It's good. More air, more light. It works. It's fine. It's okay. And I'm getting to the end. In this whole process of doing this, a lot of interesting sort of like side things happened. Like, they started asking a lot of questions about architecture, about design. And we were sharing a lot of pictures online and stuff. And at a certain point, I realized I've got like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 boxes of books in the basement here in Ottawa that I boxed when I finished studying and when I went to Germany, thinking it's just going to be a few months or maybe a year, and I'll unbox them. But they're still there, or they were still there. And so I asked them, like, would you guys like want to have, like, I don't know, a whole bunch of books that I used when I was at university, like about architecture, about photography, about design, about art, about urban history, all this kind of stuff. Like, not to read and become like a professional urbanist, but just to explore, just for ideas, just for, you know, dreaming. And they were like, wow, that would be like amazing. Yeah, because, you know, we can't get online and find all this stuff all the time. So let's make a library. So all of a sudden, an idea came up. We're going to make the first ever refugee architecture library. So I came to Ottawa, and with help from my family. We boxed those books. We had them sent off to Berlin. I reboxed them. And together with a colleague of mine, I went to Pagarinia with 60 kilos of former books of mine that I used when I was here, and it's just some of them there. And and we created this library, which has become like sort of like a main sort of function and meeting point also of this building, community interaction thing. So I went there and they had this huge event to launch the library. It was pretty spectacular. They don't have access to books. And whenever there is like a little library that's built, it's kind of like kids' textbooks and things, which are super important, but it's not really fun stuff. It's not things that they really want to, no pictures in them and da-da-da. So at this launching event, these are the boxes that we carried over with the books. This guy here is the security director from the Ugandan government responsible for the refugee settlement, saying how important it is to have something like this library so that like idle youth have actually something to do, something to look at. Like this is fundamentally radical thing that we really, really, really need here. So that was kind of cool. They made this banner, it says the launch of the Refugees Architecture Library. Everybody that was there came and signed it. That's kind of cool. I thought, what are you doing? Well, it's our library. So putting their signatures on this banner was like, it's like their ownership now of this thing. And here I am just kind of going through the books and the book list just to make sure that it all makes sense. It was about 100 books that ended up there. So this is Vuga, who you saw earlier, with one of the groovy bookshelves that they built. Super idea, right? Making a 45-degree bookshelf so the books don't fall over and get destroyed. And the other picture is Bako. She's the librarian. And Doot, who's one of the young tech hacktivist guys who deals with the GitHub stuff. Just a couple of shots of some of the people, local, people coming and just checking these books out. And again, it's like some are actually reading them, some are looking at them. This guy in the red shirt, he's sketching from the book. This is like, this blew our mind. And so I'm going to end my talk here with Bako. She's the librarian there. So Bako has no previous skills in computer. She has no previous skills in dealing with books, but she's keen and she's learning, she's getting taught on how to do this kind of stuff. She's trying to organize like activities on Saturdays and things, and she would love to have some more cool books. So I'd be happy, if anybody here wants to contribute to the world's first and only ever refugee architecture library, we can maybe set up some way to do that. Otherwise, you can also contact me there. That's my email address. Openculture.agency is our website. It's our URL. Those hashtags are, some of the ones that we use for this project. And I'd like to, be happy, of course, to have questions also from the folks who are online. I don't see you there, but I'm assuming that you guys are there. We still have a few minutes, I think, that we can do some questions. And part of this, also this opportunity to be here, is I am also pitching this. Like, what we did there was really, really insane. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if we'd get a building. We didn't know if we'd have a repository. And somehow it worked. But it's really just like a first iteration. I would really like to I would love it if this could become also kind of a collaborative project with Carleton University School of Architecture somehow. Or maybe the business school or, whatever. We need money for this stuff, but we also need people power. Right? So like skills, for example, like I mentioned before, in photography, in GitHub, in digitizing things, looking at all these kinds of elements on how to do projects and methodology. Having somebody from here, for example, do an online workshop on any one of those topics is something that would be amazing. Yeah? And it doesn't really take a lot of money, or any money maybe. It cost about the equivalent of roughly $5,000 US to build that house. I don't know if we can do it again for that amount, because it was really kind of very crazy and very under the radar, because like I said at the beginning, the funder doesn't allow you to build, so we were building a digital repository, not a building, right? We ended up with one kind of accidentally on the side. And for example, this library idea, there is no funding there. Even the UNHCR that would love to give money to it, they're responsible for making sure that people in the refugee settlements have food. And their budget has dropped down to 60%. So that means that people are getting 60% of the required rations that they have. So they don't have a penny extra. But in order for Bako to do her work and to run activities in there, she needs like around $100 a month. That's a lot of money there. And so, if anybody's interested in kind of supporting this kind of idea of the library, or, if you have experience on creating sort of like small digital libraries and stuff, she's definitely happy to hear from you. So, yeah. So anyways, once again, thank you very much, and the floor is yours. So, and I'm gonna stop the share and go and see if we get the people. The people. There are the people. So, but maybe if we have any questions right away, or comments, feedback from anybody here. Benjiani.
Steve, it's so great that you're doing this. I always think of your class and that whole group of you that graduated in the 90s where there was no workaround at all. And as you said, as the whole technological revolution, the internet was starting.
Oh yeah, sorry, just take the mic. And
Come to the mic, actually. As soon as the mic goes into
Oh, yeah.
the speakers, we get feedback. So come on.
yeah, I'm hoping that the folks, okay, they said that we don't hear. If you don't hear, yeah, you come over here and talk here.
Hopefully the people online can hear me now. And Steve, you might just go up to view, and you can go a different view where we see all the people on the,
Press the grid.
Press the grid.
the grid, yeah.
All right. See, this is this proprietary software stuff I don't use, so
We only survived COVID using this stuff, and thank goodness the university bought it for us.
I can show you some that are for free. Okay, anyways, whatever, go ahead, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. No. Anyway, I always think of your class graduating in when you did, and when there was really no workaround at all in Canada, and when the internet revolution was just starting, and a bunch of you went off to theater production design, a bunch of you went off to digital design, and it's really interesting in your whole journey that you're working your way backwards in a way to something which is built, and that you got there through the digital all the way back to the analog, and then you ended with the book itself. So yeah. It's like you've come full circle, which I thought was really, really interesting to see that, in fact, that instead of moving from the built to the digital, you're moving from the digital and finding your way back. And I love the notion that you weren't building a building, you were actually documenting a process that you would use to demonstrate or to distribute digitally, and the building was simply just an artifact that was used for prototyping. So I think the notion of being extremely clever in terms of how you use money and how you justify or explain these build artifacts is really great. So I'm just absolutely delighted to have you back, and I just wanted to start off the conversation by saying that.
Okay,
so thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. Any of you students out there? Oh, yeah, maybe just stand up, Give your answer or your question, and I'll just try to repeat it. So,
Or come forward if you want.
or if you want to come forward. Yeah. Okay. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, super question. So I mentioned at the beginning that we support these youth innovation hubs. And 3 of them are in South Sudan, and 3 of them are in Uganda by refugees. Now there's a question of stability, right? The ones that are building these hubs in South Sudan, they really want to stay, right? They're building up infrastructure. They're helping build the country. The other ones that are refugees, oh, sorry. So the question was, like, if you're a refugee, right? What do you do after? Like, do you stay a refugee forever? Do you move into the community, or do you go back home, right? That was kind of your question, right? Yeah. And so this is a very interesting thing because, for example, when you're building a building, the people are there, but they might be gone tomorrow because they don't want to be there. And there's no clear, there's no clear way to do that. But that's why these refugee settlements, refugee camps tend to be very temporary. The problem in the South Sudanese conflict is, which has actually gone back decades, is that, and Vuga said he's now been a refugee twice in his life, is that a lot of these settlements become permanent or reasonably permanent. Like some of them have been there. Pagarini is a relatively new one. Some have been there 30, 40 years. So kids are born there, whatever. Then there's a bit of peace in South Sudan. They go back, war breaks out again. They go back and become refugees again. So we have a difficult dichotomy in stability between the organizations and groups that we work with in Uganda as opposed to those in South Sudan. So it's hard, for example, to keep continuity, because also if you learn a really good skill, right, you want to go and make money, so you're going to leave. And as a refugee in Uganda, you can leave the refugee settlement. You can go to Kampala or any town and work and all that. But it is difficult, and if you leave the refugee settlement to do that, then, I don't know, you don't have a place to stay and all that kind of stuff. So it's a complex, extremely unstable world for them. Yeah. But nonetheless, I mean, you saw the UNHCR building that they were building there, right? That's built to last forever kind of thing. So it's, we don't know where it's going. We want the conflict to end. And maybe just to last little point on that, one of the organizations that we work with has actually established sort of like their own satellite organization back across the border in South Sudan and are trying to do cross-border stuff to try to help people move back from the refugee settlements back into the home country. So. Yeah.
This time This time, yeah. I'll put the mic down at my very low level here. Steve, I just have a question about the, first of all, thank you so much for the lecture. Yeah, it's amazing. And ongoing. I have a question about the GitHub and how I understand the process now as it relates to the documentation of the process. But was it also used early on in collecting ideas from the community, or could it be expanded back into the community engagement and prototyping, so that even with like a simple online tool, people could contribute to somebody as they're in a centralized space, much actually like a mirror or an analog of the building that you just made, where there's a big open kind of social dimension and a kind of a closed, like where we're gathering all the stuff together. Is that like a possibility in the future of the system?
Yeah, totally. I mean, GitHub, like any kind of online tool or collaborative software, requires a certain, knowledge. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the thing that that group that you saw there consulting would use or be able to use, because they're also, I mean, when people there tend to be online, it's usually like on their phones. And not that many people have smartphones. They have feature phones that they can do text messaging and stuff with. So access, for example, to that kind of stuff is limited. So you need a moderator. So Doot, who was the young guy that was leaning over in the picture with the librarian, he's really able at that kind of stuff. And like the training is oriented to people who can get that. And for this particular project, it was really developed into the whole structure of it. But the whole thing was a training exercise. So we were training people on how to use GitHub and how to develop a methodology and how to do the documentation and build. So it kind of all happened at the same time, but that was part of the experience. So now we know, okay, so what was kind of working, what wasn't working, and that's why this prototype was really like this first iteration. And the repository is not done. So you can't go to it now and say, okay, I'm going to build this kind of house, and it's done. Like the descriptions on how to build the wall and stuff, you know, it's far from perfect. So we want to have, you know, kind of like a next phase now of like looking at the whole methodology of the repository itself to kind of basically, you know, structure it and clean it up to then make it have that communication aspect. And that also takes, you know, some mentoring and training. But totally, I mean, what you say, that's certainly part of the idea. And yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, it was like 3-4 months, this whole thing. And yeah, so, you know, again, it's like an open question also to Carleton University, like, you know, can we do this together kind of thing? So, thanks.
Yes, I think we can. Anybody else?
Yep. Pardon me?
Food and water source around what people
So the question was food and water supply. It doesn't rain very often where they are, but when it rains, it pours. So water also gets into the building at the pavilion, not bad, flows out again, an hour later it's dry. There are wells that have been built either by the local government or by the UN, so that's one of the things the UN does do. People have to walk to the well to get drinking water. It's as far as I know, it's okay, it's adequate, but what they also do is they have big drums for water, like to hold it, and people get sick from that because the water doesn't stay clean long enough. So we've also had some projects on how to develop sensors, DIY sensors for water quality, and then the issue of food is, again, when you're in the refugee settlement, you don't really have means to sort of buy things. There's no economy, there's no structure, or very little. So that is the responsibility of the UNHCR, the United Nations Commission for Refugees, High Commission for Refugees. And they have a budget that, like I said, allows them to provide what should be 60% of people's food needs. So they have to, they have to deal with that. But there are ways also of earning money, like you are allowed to earn money, and then you can go to the market and buy stuff. There is food. I mean, this particular refugee settlement is around 20 kilometers from Adjumani, which is the nearest small town. So you also have to get there. It's not easy. And it varies from place to place. Now, what's very different in Uganda as opposed to maybe other places where these refugee situations happen is that the whole thing isn't actually run by the UNHCR. It is actually run by what they call the Office of the Prime Minister, which here sounds very funny, but it is a federal agency. It's kind of an interior ministry. So they organize it, and then they work together with the UNHCR to try to kind of get these services in there, because the local government, also doesn't have that many means. And Vuga mentioned briefly, I don't know if anybody caught it, he mentioned like host community. So the land that this refugee settlement is on is not like, it belongs to people, right? There is already a Ugandan community, villages that kind of live there. So these people are kind of like guests on this land, and there's a lot of cooperation and interaction between the refugee community and the host community, because there's also quite interesting sort of exchange of skills, because there are refugees who are trained doctors, so there's that kind of exchange, which also creates some economic activity, but it's very, very bumpy.
So that's why they keep leaving, because they don't have anything like just a priority source. Just something to exist.
Well, yeah, they're not leaving. It's not like a lot of people are leaving, but I mean the thing is, they're refugees, so they don't just in general, right? They don't really want to be there. Unless they can get some opportunity there that maybe they don't have in South Sudan and can follow that. Right now, there's a period of relative political stability in South Sudan, so some communities are going back, but they're very hesitant because they don't trust the government and they've got bad experiences. And the radical difference basically of being on the Ugandan side or on the South Sudanese side is you've got security, right? On the South Sudanese side, even if it looks like reasonably secure, it's very hard to go and plant a field because you might get shot, right? So agriculture doesn't happen because people are afraid of getting shot. That's not going to happen on the Ugandan side of the border. So there's just less stress. There's a bit more ease. So yeah, it doesn't get to that extent that it's so bad they got to leave, because this is still better, than where they came from. No. Okay, we'll take one more and then maybe we'll check. I'll see what we have here. I don't know how to get all these. I will pose. Oh, Cheryl Boyle will pose it. Okay. They haven't been. Okay. Anyways.
Hi, Stephen.
Yes.
Eloise Emden here from Carleton University, and your long-lost friend, and I just wanted to say...
Not lost at all.
I just wanted to say, I have here with me a colleague, another Canadian African who happens to be in the audience, and he and I visited Lira.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wanted to say our lived experience of visiting was to find refugees that lived in literally the tented camps, but they weren't really nice tents, they were plastic tents. And when we got there, this was years after the Lord's Resistance Army, process, and the process that the UNHCR, or actually it was, I think it's UNHCR, whoever gives food, they had reduced the food down to, I think, 10%.
Right.
So there's this ratcheting down of dependency. It's like, trying to get your teenage kids to leave the house.
Yeah.
And what happens is that there are communities, as you've said, that have really become quite established, and it's hard for them to go back. In fact, the Ugandan government was saying to those communities, it's fine, you should go back now. And there were community members who were saying, my friend went across that border the other day and got blown up by a landmine. So, the insecurity is unbelievable, and how community gets established around that is really, I guess, a question. What I find fascinating about your story, though, is how this youth community has built an infrastructure that, my question is, what is their sense of belonging? Because they kind of built that infrastructure. It's not a tent. It's something that really they should, find extension to their identity to. And I want to bring my colleague in here, who, Alan Kane, who I visited in Angola, and who, also an architect, also an adjunct research professor here at Carleton University, did this community building process in helping soldiers demilitarize after 40 years of war in Huambo, and also through built artifacts and built infrastructure, helped establish community again. So there's a bit of a contrast here between a refugee community who would like to go back home, whereas, you know, you were helping really settle refugees who were in the country. But I just wanted to start a discourse between the two of you. So, this is Alan Kane.
Thank you, Eloise. Steve, maybe after we can exchange some thoughts on this, but I wanted to mention, I've been to that area back in 1973.
Wow.
I was working in Egypt, in fact, with Hassan Fassi in Lower Egypt. After I took the Nile steamer down the Nile and all the way to eventually to Juba. And en route, I came across, and this is a contribution to the history of digital communication in that part of the world. We followed an overland track down the telegraph lines that ran all the way from Europe down the Nile to a place called Ye,
Yeah.
on the you probably know in South Sudan. That was the end of the telegraph line.
Yeah.
And that's digital communication from the 19th century, right? But, well, it's not digital, it's analog, but it's,
Yeah.
you know, electronic.
Electronic.
It's electronic.
Yeah.
At the end of the telegraph line, there was a hut, and outside the hut was a huge talking drum, a hollowed out log with, and communications continued on through the bush telegraph, transmitted from the Morse code telegraph to indigenous forms of communication throughout that whole region. Yeah. So it's amazing to see the work that you've done in promoting communication, and I made it down that trip through southern Sudan. It was 2 years in 1972, 73, when the civil war ceased it was a ceasefire for
Right.
2
Yeah.
years.
First
and it
time.
started up and went on for the,
Yeah.
I mean, that civil war has been going on for 60 years.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to mention that it's amazing to see. When I was in Lira with Heloise, we were also looking at some of these were Lord's Resistance refugees at that time, but the introduction of digital communication. So it's amazing to see your work and the ongoing work in promoting communication in that part of the world. So anyway, just congratulations.
Yeah,
on that.
thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned Ye. That's actually the community that a lot of the people that we work with are from. And this satellite that I was talking about that they're trying to establish back across the other side of the border is in Ye. And we have some, I see some colleagues here online who are actually originally from Ye. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me on the Zoom call, if anybody there would like to say anything. I mean, we probably have to close down. I think we're sort of at the end, but maybe a final hello or goodbye or something. I see Wafula is on screen right now. He's one of that Pagarinya community. I don't know, Wafula, if you'd like. You always have things to say. You're an artist. Yeah.
Hello.
You can unmute yourself, and maybe if we can see you for a second, Wafula.
Hello.
Yeah, we hear you, Wafula. I know it's deep
Nice
night
to
where
be
you are.
here.
Can we see you?
I'm in darkness. The power's gone.
I know, it's like, yeah, you know, the electricity is an issue, so I really appreciate that we can see. Great that you've got this white stripy shirt on. Wafula, you do a lot of this GitHub repository work there, and you've helped that documentation. So, anything you'd like to say to this crowd here?
Just gone because it's scary to come.
Sorry?
Internet network.
Sucks.
Network sucks.
Yeah. So fill in the blanks always, right, on Zoom calls. Okay. Anyways, Wafla, I really appreciate that you were there. Well, I don't know. Is there anybody with it? Oh, yeah.
So, hi, I'm Sujit Sur from School of Business. Thank you for such an inspiring talk. I was thinking about it. What you did is actually develop a process for knowledge transfer and capacity building, right? And then the local youth out there have taken it on. You did it in terms of a building, and the repository is on architecture. Do you think, is there a potential of actually developing it further into basic agriculture, poultry, animal husbandry, the basic necessities?
Sure.
And more than that, if you are able to do that, would the UN also then contribute? Like as they said, it's a sliding scale, which from 60 will go down to 50 and 40, but will they give some seed capital to actually start with the livestock or agriculture? And then we can use the process that you have generated or created, so to speak, to develop that knowledge or transfer the knowledge. And that might be a formal kind of partnership with Carlton.
Yeah, so the question here was whether like the methodology that we developed for the building can also be used in other areas like in agriculture. And the answer unequivocally is absolutely yes. Because just like doing an architecture project or whatever, you've got an idea, it turns into a concept, you have to develop a methodology to realize it, then you've got an output. And the output product, it can be a building, it could be a car or a food system, whatever, right? But learning how to do that methodology is the key to it. So, I mean, in my career, I still call myself an architect because everything I do has to do with developing a methodology to realize a certain thing at the end. And I don't see any difference in it to what I did here, that resulted in some kind of model that we put here on the wall, to doing this kind of work. And one of the things that we try to do in the projects really is to look at these things as models that you can take to do these other things. That does require continuity. It's the kind of thing also that organizations like the UN, they have difficulty with. They don't really get it very often. They look at the end product kind of thing, or they look at a training as a very straightforward thing. I'm going to learn how to do, we're going to do something on digital photography for journalists and do a 1-week training kind of thing. So in this kind of scenario that we're in, it's a puzzle, and we try to put these pieces of a puzzle together. And in this particular project, I mean, we didn't quite get there, right? I mean, it's really just, the beginning. And I think if we can finish, like do another phase, somebody can, get some money that we can finish this, then we have an interesting model, to do those kinds of things. The problem with the UN, and I work with a lot of different UN agencies, is they are extremely unreliable. And they'll say, oh, this is fantastic, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to give money to this, and then nothing happens. And it's like with the UNHCR, right? They think this stuff is amazing, but they're sort of like, I don't know, incapacitated. They can't really do anything, specifically, directly. But then you have UNICEF, for example. UNICEF has more money than they know what to do with because people donate tons to UNICEF, but then they can't, because they'll get money for Bangladesh relief, and they get maybe $1 billion too much, and they don't know what to do, and they can't move it from one part of the agency to another. So there's a dysfunctionality in general in the UN system, and the work that we do, for the most part, not entirely, but it gets funded by the German government, either the Foreign Office, if it's a more political project like Defy Hate Now, or this AskNet related work comes from the Ministry of Economic Development and International Cooperation. But it's really, like I mentioned, it's really just about, they only give you money for, for training, for consulting, that kind of stuff. So getting to those practical elements is really the difficult thing. And that's one reason why I would love to work together with an organization, could be a university that actually has a mandate to develop solutions, right? The UN doesn't develop solutions. It's,
We can also get money from SURE,
right,
Canadian agencies. It has to be set up as a partnership, right?
yeah,
What you have is a relationship on ground.
yeah,
What you have is a process of transferring knowledge and accumulating knowledge into this repository.
yeah.
So do you want to just keep it to architecture?
No, 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 no. That's what I'm saying. That it's absolutely not. And Shirk is very interesting for that. We've looked at that also before, but it's been a sort of bit of a problem about the kind of construct. You know, but we can talk about that later. But maybe just a little thing just to add to that. Often, we don't need a lot of money, and it's really hard to get small amounts of money. Like sometimes you're kind of forced to having to go for like, I don't know, $5 million grant, but we only need 10,000 bucks. So, yeah, and so, but it's getting these, you know, 100 bucks a month to run the library, getting the 5,000 bucks to build the building, right? Those kinds of things, yeah, it's difficult. And we don't have a lot of spare time to be doing that either, because the work itself in the projects, especially in COVID, like, it was so difficult to do everything online. I mean, I think you guys all know about that, but when you're dealing with an environment that already has difficulties getting online and stuff, it just, well, it's hard. I think we got to end, right?
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me? No.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
But you can come over here.
I'm just gonna.
You can mosey on over here.
It's fine. On behalf of Carlton, Steve, thanks so much for a great presentation, and to the audience for a very nice engagement. And yeah, really interesting project. I think we have many conversations to have beyond today. And so thanks everybody for listening, and round of applause. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks to you guys. Yeah, and also, I mean, if you're still online, I really appreciate Peter Troyheit and Vuga William for coming on. So thank you, and yeah, let's keep doing, which was another expression that they had here. So thanks, folks. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Cheryl, as well, and.